Hello, everybody. I think I know most of you. Thank you for the introduction. So, this is basically my master's research I'm presenting to you guys today. So that's the first presentation after the defense. So I'm a little nervous. But,
you're right at the end.
So this idea was proposed by Karen, my advisor, to build this first module to try to understand Brazil nuts in swidden fallows. So we call it the evaluation of swidden fallows potential to increase landscape level Brazil nut productivity in the Western Amazonia. But first, before I start talking about the thesis itself, I would like just to give a little bit of background information. I really like maps, and I'm very visual person, so I like to show a map as the first thing, just to show you guys where my study area is. So Acre States, this little, very close to, or it's bordering Bolivia. It's a settlement project, also known as Cachoeira. That means waterfall in Portuguese. It's almost 25,000 hectares. As I said, it borders Bolivia. In 1999, it was created as a protected area owned by the government, but co-managed by the residents. And it resulted from a rubber capper movement to protect their land. I'll talk a little bit more about rubber cappers in a minute. And then basically, people that live there, they live by substantial agriculture and extraction of timber and non-timber forest products. So what I want you just to guys remember, that's not an indigenous community, it's a traditional community descendant from rubber cappers. So why the rubber cappers, why they're descendants of rubber cappers is there were two big rubber booms in the Amazon. The first one started when Europe started asking for rubber in the late 1800s. So people started moving across Brazil to the Amazon to start extracting rubber. And everything is stopped in 1912 when the Asians and Africans plantations of rubber start producing and send this cheaper rubber to Europe, so it crashed the local market. And the second one was during the World War II. So people in Brazil had two options, soldiers were two options: or go to Europe to fight the war, or go to the Amazon to extract rubber to supply markets, especially in the United States, that were producing to supply the war efforts. And they had a specific name for those soldiers. They were called rubber soldiers. So they were sent to the Amazon to tap rubber, and with the promise that after the end of the war, they would be sent back to their homes as war heroes. But the government never supplied that promise, so they were just left there. So what so either in the two rubber booms, they had this crash, so make the rubber cappers and other local residents to diversify their activities, so they would start intensify agriculture or starting extracting timber and non-timber products from the forest. So what I want you guys to just take into account is remember that these people went from especially northeast Brazil and moved to the Amazon region, including Acre, and were basically abandoned there. So they had to start living there. Okay. So and then what they normally do is what's called shifting cultivation cycle when it comes to agriculture. So there's a forest patch. They will slash and burn, used for agriculture, normally cassavas, corn, and beans for like about 2 or 3 years, like each year a different culture, or sometimes they're a mixed culture. And then they will abandon that for regeneration. And this regeneration plot can go either back to the shifting cultivation cycle or regenerate all the way back to forest. And that's not exclusive from agri. That's like all over the world. People use that, and it's the same in Brazil and in the study area. Okay, so what this has to do with Brazil nuts is that once they start to diversify, and Brazil nuts start to get more like famous, or like people start to demanding Brazil nuts, so the market had to supply that. So, and for the last 2 decades, it's been known as the cornerstone of extractivism in Amazon for 2 reasons: economic and conservation. Conservation because Brazil nuts is in its majority collect from mature forests. So the residents or the collectors, I will call them landowners for so they tend to protect areas rich in Brazil nuts because they know they don't produce well in pastures or plantations. So that's like from their conservation. And the economic is that because the market is increasing, so also is the price. So that's a example of how the Brazil nut price has increased from 1994 to 2017. So the orange line is in dollars, the brown line is in reais. That's a price for a lata, which is their measurement unit. That's normally how they sell. It's a paint can, basically. It's common in Brazil, like a square, rectangle, big, mellow paint. So paint cane, after using the paint, they use it for storage. So, and that's how they still measure to today. Okay, so we're talking about these rubber tackers or rubber tacker descendants. Some people still have rubber, but the price is so low right now that it's not economically viable to tap rubber. So some people still do because they still need that money. But most of people live from substantial agriculture or timber or non-timber forest projects. So, but for this project, we were focusing on swidden fallows. So I want to ask you guys what you guys understand about swidden fallows. You guys?
Never heard of it.
Okay. Anybody? Not okay. So, okay, what I mean by swidden fallows is a plot that went through this agriculture cycle I was mentioning before, slash and burn, cultivations, and then abandonment. Went to at least one of them, and is now in the regeneration process. So, a lot of we call that in Brazil also as capoeira. It's like a secondary forest. But the swidden word itself has to do with the slash and burning, because that's somehow important to what we're talking about. So, and then why are we focused on swidden fallows? So there are another projects that focus in Brazil nuts in mature forests, but none had focused in production in secondary forests or swidden fallows. And there's evidence that the recruitment of Brazil nuts in seedlings and sapling stage are higher than in mature forests. That was a work done by Jamie Coda, also here at UF. She established that densities of individuals in seedlings and sapling stage are higher when compared to mature forests. And we were asking ourselves, like, does that could translate to our productions in those areas in the future? And swidden fallows also have better conditions as when it comes to light and soil nutrition. One is because there's less competitions of ground because it's clear cut, and conditions probably because of the fact that it was burned, so there's abundance of nutrient available for the trees to grow. And extensions of areas is, if we think about how long people have been doing that in the Amazon, like even the indigenous people, they sometimes do similar process. So it could have extension of areas in secondary or as swidden fallows in regeneration process. So we're just like thinking about that. Then when it comes to the project itself, where my thesis is, to what extent could forest residents could increase Brazil nuts productivity by abandoning those fallows? So as a specific questions, we wanted to answer density and size of this Brazil nuts in swidden fallows in different ages, because not only what Kata did was recent, like less than 10 years old fallows, so we didn't know how that it was in older fallows. Also, we wanted to know the landowner's perspective about this idea of abandoning swidden fallows. And project the productivity of the fallows in inventory to see how those densities could translate into productivity in the future. I'm just checking if I'm not forgetting saying, guys. So I had two field summers, or two summers I spent in the field, 2017 and 2018 last year. The first was mostly exploratory and data collection focused. So it was focused on doing inventory of fallows and identifying and measuring Brazil nut trees in swidden fallows. So we did a snowballing sample to aggregate participants. We started with some landowners that were already engaged with some other projects that worked with Karen before, or with our local partner with the Embrapa and Federal University of Acre. And then from these participants, we started engaging other participants. So the inventory was similar. What's done like a forest inventory. We'll circulate the area, and the perimeter was established by the landowner. He will go with us. We'll ask him to go with us and circulate the area and say, like, that's my fallow, that's my area. And after that, he could either like stay with us, work with us, or just stay around and talk, or we could. I had a field assistant both times, so we both were able to do the work by ourselves. So what we would do, we would walk each line, like carefully walking around and trying to identify each one of the Brazil nut trees higher than 1.5 meters. That was like our cut. Lower than that, we were not messing with that, because sometimes they're like so tiny we cannot even see. So
Eduardo, what was the size of the fallow and the distance? Just having
okay, great idea. I think this in particular was around a little over 1 hectare, and we were doing 25 meters between them, but then we'll do a imaginary line between, and then we'll walk in here, and then we will go to the second one and walk in here, and complete. So like systematically, we're walking all the fallow. But we had fallows with different sizes. We had like the biggest one was with 3.5 hectares, and then we have a smaller one with less than 0.5 hectare. So it will depend on like how big the agriculture plot they have. But I think great question. I was forgetting about it. So just that's me identifying that's a Brazil nut tree, and that's also a Brazil nut tree. So like, just showing a little bit the conditions we were in. So it's a secondary forest. It has a lot of lianas, a lot of you got like huh? Yeah, thorny vines. Like sometimes some fellows were terrible to work, but we survived.
How old were they? They were all the same age of
No, we had different, like, we didn't have too much options to choose from, so we would ask them, like, do you have fellows and more or less their ages? But we have fellows from 12 to 60 years old, or around 60 years old. It's not specifically, but it's range of hair. But yeah. So another measurements we did in each individual tree was diameter, like this is height and crawl height. Competitions. I'm not going to talk too much about competition in this particular presentation, but we're just trying to estimate vegetative competitions between the trees and the fallows, and also estimating liana cover, crown positions, intermediate, dominant, predominant, suppress. And we collected the GPS tracks of the fallows, but then I could easily create those maps later. And then we can also, if we want, to try to go back and find the trees a couple of years from now, see how they're doing. So that was like basically my first summer field. I did 11 fallows in about 2 months. So last year I went back and as kind of a thank you message, I create a small map for each. So there, like, for example, this one had only one fallow, but there are people with multiple fallows within their land holding. So I will give a map to the landowner with the information we gather from its fallow, just a little sheet with like that many trees, that's the size of the trees, just as a thank you note, just to show what we're doing. And with also a second objective of that will be to start a interview, because we wanted to gather some information about the fallows itself. That's Dr. Kusebat from Embrapa. That's one resident, and that's a master student from Federal University of Acre. He was with me some days in the field too last summer, because he's kind of continuing my work, where my model is lacking. He's trying to fill some gaps and go further. I thought we had some questions. Sorry. Okay, so that was my interview sheet. It was very simple. I did not want to do a social analysis of there. That's not my field. So the first question was designed to understand a little better the history of fallow, the fallow history, like when it was cleared, if it was cleared multiple times, what crops it was slash and burn, like just to try and understand the dynamics that happened in the fallow. The second one was just to see what they wanted to do with the fallow after the project. And the third was trying to address the second one of my questions about their perspective about the project. So just to try to understand that. And the fourth, we wanted to compare the Brazil nut productivity as a landscape, like across the field. So we wanted to know their average production in the last season. And like these three questions were done were only for the landowners that participate, or like we had fallows, we analyzed their fallows. But this fourth one was we tried to do with all the 88 landowners from the settlement, and we had a good response. Like most of them answered, because it was just like how much Brazil nuts you produce like in last season, and their estimation of area, because we're doing productivity, so it's production divided by area. So with all the data we had, we came to the model. Don't worry, I won't bother you guys with all these details. If somebody wants, we can talk about it. What I want you guys to know is it was an individual-based model. What it means is like each tree was considered separately, so the equations will be managed like in each individual tree. We'll calculate this tree, and then I'll group them together in fallows for the results. Like each tree will be treated separately in the model. So we had 3 sets of equations to calculate survivorship, growth, and production. And we were trying to predict 40 years in the future, just to see like how those trees will be in 40 years. So because this model has 2 stochastics or random parameters, we run it 50 times, and we'll do average of the results, so it won't be like bias in those stochastic elements. The equations for the survival, growth, and productions, they are all from mature forests, because our data was not enough to create equations, so we didn't have enough data to analyze growth in secondary for itself. But for terms of the first model, we think did a pretty good work to show what's going on there. Yeah. So now moving on to the results, I will cut off half the graph just so we can focus on one, so you guys can understand a little bit. So that's the crown positions of trees by the DBH classes in 4 fallow age. Remember, like Patricia asked the age. So we tried to divide it down in 4 categories of age due to natural clustering. We just, because we couldn't kind of choose the age. So whatever they said, the age was, I tried to verify that using remote sensing imagery in Google Earth Engine, just to show like they're about right, like 1 or 2 years like difference. And most of the errors were fine, like they were good and remember when they used the error for the last time. So, and then we divide them in little clusters, like here in the middle, for example, between 22 and 26, there were none. So they naturally had some clustering. So we divide them in that. So what I want to show you guys with this is that, and then those are the DBH classes, 0 to 10 centimeters, 10 to 20, so forth, and in crown position. So suppressed, intermediate, predominant, and dominant. And the smaller they are, the more suppressed they are. And once they come to like taller, bigger trees, they are taller, so they are like dominants or co-dominants. And that's also when they start producing. So the literature, oh my God, I forgot that. Yeah, thank you. Suggests that 40 centimeters of DBH is around when they start to like achieve reproductive maturity and start producing fruits. So we use that as a threshold in the model too. Just like when they started 40 centimeters in growth, we start producing. It's not a fact, but
Just to clarify, the slots of years are the age of the tree or the fallow?
the fallows, yes, the fallows. So, and then we did that to like all the age clustering. So you can see also that the more to go in the future, we have like bigger proportions of codominant and dominant. And regardless of fallow age, the larger the trees, they had greater life availability. So it would events in time, in size with time. So going forward, and those are results only from the inventory. There's no model, and just showing the data we had. When it comes to DVH distribution, so also, again, the fallow age classes in clusters, in colors now. And then the letters are just a code I gave to each fallow. Like, for example, A was my first and B was my second, but they're in order of age. So J is the youngest one with 12, and N is the oldest one with 60. So the DVH was significantly different by fallow age, increasing with fallow age. So the older was like the different they were, so it would increase. And that's when we start looking at the model. I'm still a little skeptical with this graph because I think all the committee was kind of, that does not look okay. But we went over, because basically it's indicating, because it's basal area from the trees, so it's indicating almost infinite growth. So we're still trying to adjust that. That could be something because we're using mature forest. Exactly, we're expecting more like a plateau kind of growth. So it could be something with the mature forest equations. We're trying to understand what's going on there here. Here is not correct. But what I want to show is that some of the smaller fallows are actually like growing faster, increasing basal area faster, and the basal area will increase over time, and that's just considering natural growth. So we are not even considering maybe management or trying to enhance that right now. We're just analyzing natural. And then for the landowners' perspective, most of them were surprised by the number of Brazil nuts we found in the fallows. They had this feeling that secondary forests or situ fallows had higher densities, but some of them were like surprised with the amount we found. Like the biggest fallow we had 40, like it was 3.5 hectares, but it had 47 trees on it. Like Brazil nut trees taller than 1.5 meters. And there were like, compared to only density, there were like smaller fallows with like 0.5 hectare, but the density was 31 trees per hectare, when the average for saplings is around 5 to 8 trees per hectare. So like we were seeing great densities. And they mostly said that they will preserve the plot. Like going back to the second question of my questionnaire, like we asked them what were the future plans for the plot. They said, we want to see what was going on. That question, I'm little like maybe biased from them, just they wanted to say what they assume I wanted to hear. But what I think one of the most interesting question was, are they talking, because it was an open interview, so like they were talking, it was kind of a conversation. So some of them suggested to actually manage the fallows to not only Brazil nuts, but for other species, timber or non-timber products. Some of them were, one of them was suggesting to, or even plant trees for with fruits that could give fruits like for humans or even to animals, so they can hunt the animals later. So like, because like fallows have this, or show that they have this better conditions to grow, so they were trying to enhance, to diversify their activities in the fallows. But I think this guy was already doing, but some of them were just suggesting, people were suggesting that And to finalize the results, again, a map. I think that's I consider one of, or the most important product of the thesis. So what we did here, we tried to summarize a little bit everything that was going on in the thesis. So we're going over all of it. So we had the distribution of the 18 fallows that entered the model. We had 19, but one we took off because we weren't sure about the data we collected. And across the study area. And so the black diamonds represent the fallows. So they're all over the study area, and they're clustering together. So we have those zoom-ins mapped. And their sizes represent the projected fruit productivity in 40 years. So like 40 years in the future, how much our model is saying this fallow is production. And again, it's productivity. So it's in size of it's comparing in their area. Because again, there's some, for example, this is our biggest fallow, and the production is not so high as like some of the smaller ones because the density is not that high. And the second set of dots in there, the round dots, this represents the data we collect with the 4th question of the questionnaires with land holding production. So we had across the map production and area estimates from them. So we did the productivity. So, and when we were talking to them, they would say, oh, these areas produce more Brazil nuts. Like those areas do not produce. And it kind of matched what they said. Like those areas really like have a higher productivity than when it comes to here. Like they say it's because of the river, because there's like between Brazil, Bolivia, it has a river as a border, and it's really kind of what we found kind of correspond to what they were telling us before we did that analysis. Just really, the closer we go to the river, less productivity we have. It's not clear why. Could be biotype. And Karen, your guys are kind of trying to, they're trying to figure that out. And again, just to show where we are. Any questions so far?
I'm sorry. Can you say first correct? What means?
It's the big one. I can which is technically yes. Yeah. Yeah, because we have like basically 3 layers here. We have this outer layer, and then this smaller one, and inside this there's like the actual nut that comes easily for us to eat. But
so
there's
everything.
Yeah, like the big one. That's because we had some different estimations. Like people would say in latas, their production in latas, but we transformed that to fruit because we had some to average. So all our model is in fruit, and that's represented. That's a good.
Were you able to establish an average of production per tree?
Yeah, we had, but as we had 250 trees, it was hard to show that in a graph. So every time we were just clustering them to the fallows, so it was easy to show. But in the model, as it was an individual-based model, it will return me each tree, like that's how big it is, that's how much it's producing in 10, 20, 30, and 40 years. Here, okay. Thanks for the question, guys. So, as the conclusion, It's the first model to explore that, and we know it's not perfect, but as we mentioned, we didn't have the exact equations for the secondary forest, but we still believe we are under predicting because forest itself maybe does not have so much light and densities are lower. So we think we might be under predicting production because we're using mature forest equations. So models themselves are not always true, like because it's hard to simulate what's going on with so many things in the forest. But we believe it's a good example of what swidden fallows can be turning in the future. Yeah, and as I mentioned, we are trying to do, or William is trying to do some improvements in our, like where our data lacks. He's trying to actually read rings to see growth in fallows. So we're trying to fill this gap of knowledge. And also, we're working with another data set from Jamie's code and now to try to improve our model right now. So we have a model a little more strong and robust. And what we think is that production in each fallow is higher if the natural density is kept higher. So it's higher right now. We can see that if we just so what that means higher production in the future. If the density is kept high, it will. So I just bold the natural because there's always this option of going there and managing those trees, like cutting lianas and cutting trees that are competing. So making them make their life easier like this. What I have for you guys was this. I would like just to thank TCD, SFRC, and Florida Biodiversity Foundation that support me through all the masters with tuitions and stipends, and TCD also with the field grants. And Embrapa as a local partner that was crucial to enter the areas, and they had research that could help. And special thanks for Dr. Karen Kiner for all her help with the stressful life that's masters. And the committee members, Dr. Proper with all of his model knowledge. Stephanie Bowman was, I think, essential to make the thesis more flow because he has a great critical eye. And Dr. Stoudhammer, she was a Gator too, right? Her master, right? Yeah. And she was a faculty here at SFRC, but now she works in the University of Alabama, and she's great with the stats, like which was great help as well. So I had two field assistants, Antonio and Francisco, and Dr. Pat from Embrapa was also always overwatching and helping and when needed. Thank you so much, guys.